Okay, good evening everybody. Let's start the meeting this evening. So a warm welcome to those of you watching on YouTube, should there be anybody. This is a meeting of the Social Care Housing Public Health Policy Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Palmer and I'm the chairman of the meeting. So just to give you a brief oversight of what we do, we monitor the performance of local public services within this remit, and we hold reviews on topics of residents' interest. We engage with a wide range of external witnesses, and that can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of today's business can be seen on the agenda, which are also accessible on YouTube if anyone is watching underneath the broadcast. For those of you in the room, please remember that if you speak, you will need to use your microphone, and obviously we're all being filmed. So, yes, I've said that about the microphones. Let's just introduce the people that we've got on around the table today. I'll start on my right with Councillor Judith Cooper, Councillor Becky Hagger, Councillor Ian Edwards, Councillor Paula Rodriguez. We have Ian Anderson, the business manager, Dan Kennedy, Zafar Zilkan, Tony Zayman, Councillor Janet Gardner, Councillor Tony Edgington and Anisha Tedji from Democratic Services. Little bit of housekeeping, I'm afraid. Please make sure your mobile phones are off or on silent, and we're not expecting a fire drill, but if we hear an alarm, please follow the officers to the exit. Thank you very much. We will now carry on with the agenda. Agenda item 1. Oh, sorry, I should have said Councillor Flynn is running late. He's sent his apologies. He's hoping to be here by 7:15. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. No, he hasn't sent his apologies.
No apologies.
Thank you. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest before the meeting this evening? No, thank you very much. We now receive the minutes of the previous meetings, which are on agenda item pages 1 to 6. Please, if anybody has anything they want to say, indicate to me. Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. There was a reference under paragraph 14 to the inspection of the children's home, and I wondered whether there was any sort of update which we could have on that, please. It wasn't mentioned there actually, but there were two requirements, and I wanted just to see what progress had been made in addressing those requirements from Ofsted. The requirements had to be dealt with by the end of August.
Okay, so what we can do then is check with the officers and report back if you're happy with that. Are you happy with that?
Thank you.
I can't speak specifically to the two requirements, but I can say that the follow-up inspection rated it overall as good.
Councillor Edgington, you wish to comment back?
I think we're talking about the same report. It's that there were still two requirements.
Right, okay, in which case.
Yes.
Thank you. So we'll check with officers and get back. Any other comments on the minutes, or are we happy to accept them? Thank you. Agenda item 4. Everything is in part 1 today. We don't have any part 2, so everything is for public broadcasting. I'm just going to jiggle the agenda around, and we are going to take agenda item 6 now, rather than agenda item 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report
that actually are submitted is in relation to looked after children and caregivers by London Borough of Hillingdon. And just to outline that, so the data provided only relates to looked after children and caregivers. It doesn't take into account in relation to children in need, children subject to child protection processes or early help. So solely in relation to LAC and what we call caregivers. So, and the data only looks at the last 3 months. So when I pulled the data, it would have been the 5th of August. So that would be May, June, July, and then until the 5th of August. So obviously data changes. It's a live data. It will change on a daily basis. Yeah. So in relation to looked after population, as of 5th of August 2019, there were 348 looked after children and 425 caregivers, as stated in the report. I'm not proposing to go through the report, but there were a couple of highlights that I wanted to bring it to the board's attention. In relation to page 41, under education, so of the 348, 216 children were statutory school-age children. And on paragraph, the bottom one that may come to your attention, in July, there were 13 looked after children without school provision. And of that, large proportion were actually unaccompanied minors that arrived during the summer holidays. And of course, schools being on summer holidays, then there was no provision to identify them. So that was the reason. In relation to the rest of the performance, as you can see, it's very much in line with either above or in line with national statistics and our comparative neighbours. So I don't necessarily need to go through each heading. In relation to health particularly, our performance always remains exceptionally well and above 90% in terms of health achievements of our children, looked after children. And you will see on page 45 that consistently, in terms of our looked after population, about 33%, it always varies between 32-33% of the LAC cohort are unaccompanied minors. And you will see that on page 45. If you look at the top diagram, it will say 22 children for that cohort. So that's 23% male of UASC, and then 9, that's about 10%. So that would be about 33%. The placement provision, again, it's very much in line with the previous reportings that we fully utilise for those children who are appropriate to be in-house foster placement, that we make full use of our in-house foster placement before going outside in terms of independent provisions, either actually independent fostering provision or residential units. And on the page 49, there were only 2 children that were actually remanded into local authority care. You will see that they're detained on child protection grounds in local authority accommodation. So there were 2 there. And I think that's all about that I wanted to say, unless there are any questions.
Thank you. It's a very comprehensive report. So are there any questions for Zephyr? Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about the children's home, which was referred to earlier on, related to the Ofsted inspection, has any progress been made in appointing a new manager?
That's not really the performance report, and I'm not able to re-answer to that.
That's a fair point. It's not related to the document that is before us at the moment. So I don't wish to be evasive, but I think what I've asked for is, does anyone have any questions about the report? So that isn't about the report. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Hag.
Thank you, Chair. A really good and comprehensive report, as the Chair said. Just 2 questions. One on page 43. I think this is good, but I just wanted you to explain it to me because I was reading it. I couldn't work out which way it was. So we've got, on the commentary, as a result, Hillingdon has a lower than national average, scoring 17 and above SDQ scores.
Yes.
So that's good.
That's actually exceptionally good, because we have the MAP service, which is part of the LAC service that's commissioned through the CCG. So actually, instead of waiting for children to actually score high, so they, sort of in terms of a child's emotional or mental health deteriorating as a result, actually we bring in services at the point of need. We're able to provide that service at very early on. So therefore, helping young people particularly to address their emotional and mental health needs. Therefore, being low is a very good outcome. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. I've got one more, Chair. Is that okay? Also on page 44, we've got, and it was just really a question, there's a small number of young people who are repeated refusing of annual health assessments. I just wondered why that was and whether we have, obviously we can't make them, I presume, but I don't know, are they the ones that could probably actually use it as well? So what my one question really is, what are we doing about that? How can we encourage them?
It's quite a difficult question, and there is no straightforward answer, as you can imagine. In relation to dental checks, I think, despite all attempts and encouragement by the child social worker, the advocates, independent reviewing officer, and so the appointment will be set for them for their health assessments on the day that they need to go, and either they don't go or they actually refuse to participate. It's a small percentage, but it will be the older age group. And I think choice is important. It would be very traumatic for a young person to go through a health assessment against their willingness to participate. So there are a lot of support in relation to enabling that to happen. But I think we have to accept that it won't be 100%, and there will be exceptional circumstances where a young person may not want to participate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Gardner.
As a follow-up to what Councillor Haggis said, the children that refuse to have annual health assessments, do you look into perhaps their backstory and why they may be refusing? Does that make sense? Because some children may have been physically abused when they were younger, and they may regard that as, I don't know, threatening behaviour or whatever. I just wonder how far you go into the children's backstories.
In every assessment, as soon as the child actually comes into care, regardless at the age that they come in, there will be a process in terms of actually planning. In the part of the care planning is not just like their as with their education and everything else. It'll be the health planning. So when a child becomes looked after, within the first month, they require their initial health assessment to be undertaken, and then thereafter it's 3 months, and then annually. So it changes, as they actually sort of progress through the care system. Mm-hmm. Then the frequency actually reduces and becomes annually. Once they've actually undertaken the initial health assessment. So throughout that time, there will be a lot of work done with our children and young people. So in terms of, we mentioned MAP service earlier on, education, advocacy, independent, and the social worker, and we've got the young inspectors, we've got the participation teams. So there are a lot of resources to actually go through and help, particularly those what we call hard to reach teenagers who do not want to participate in their health assessment. So actually, it's not that that appointment will be made and they don't just show up. It'll be that if they don't show up, there will be follow-up, finding out if they want to have somebody else with them, if they will have a befriender to attend health appointments, do they want the key worker, the social worker, independent reviewing officer. So they have a range of options that are available to them.
Councillor Edgington.
that on page 41, the last paragraph, just to kind of signpost you where Councillor Jane is referring to. You will see there's one child that actually is school refuser. That's what you're referring to, isn't that correct?
I thought there was some...
I think that's the...
I seem to think that there was a school which had actually permanently excluded one child, but I don't know whether that was correct.
Dan can answer that question, I think.
Officers don't have the details here, but I think we just need to check and clarify and then come back through the chair.
Thank you, so that will be done. Are there any more questions? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at the key performance indicators on page 41, and at the top there, well, I can see that, that is not a bad figure. My impression is that we have made good progress, and we've probably made good progress against other authorities, though I can't find it in the report. That may just be my reading. But it does leave 31% of children who are underachieving still. And I'm concerned about them, and I'm concerned about how we move them further forward. I note that there are problems with attendance still, although that has improved. But it's 93 point something, which is not really high enough for them to be making the most of their education. And then if you move on to page 42, where we have other needs, I have no idea what other needs are. Maybe one of you can explain. But there are a significant number of them who presumably haven't managed to make any full benefit from the education that we have been offering them. I know I've covered lots of things there, but if you could put them together and explain, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, join up. In relation to underachieving children, looked after children, I think on page 41, paragraph 2, that's in relation to PEPs. I think if we start with PEPs, and in Hillingdon, in terms, I'm assuming you all understand what PEP means, personal education plan. When a child becomes looked after, within 4 weeks, there needs to be a personal education plan for every looked after child. So our completion and children's participation in their personal education plan is actually exceptionally high. And during that meeting, there will be a number of professionals and the child or the young person who will be present in that will be setting up their aims and objectives and in terms of educational goals and including attendance. So whilst the completion of PEP and the aspirations that we have for our looked after children is very good, then the bottom one, so that would be the third paragraph, is the 93% that you're referring to. So our virtual school works very closely with all our children, looked after children. Every looked after child has a designated, appointed virtual school officer, and who works very closely with the child, with education, their schools, and the range of professionals to keep them improve their attendance, and B, to actually ensure that their educational attainment continues to improve. So, if the panel prefer, we could do a further report from the virtual head to assist us.
I mean, and I think it's probably just to add to what Zaffar's just said. I mean, one of the considerations we have to take into account is, I guess, it's the starting point for some of those young people and children when they enter the care system, and therefore one of our key measures is progress during that time. And research shows that the longer the child is actually looked after, actually the better they tend to do in terms of their educational outcomes, because as Zaffar has described, there's a very structured input and arrangement and support provided to looked after children. But in terms of the last academic year's figures, I know I haven't got all the figures here, but they were generally quite positive. So I think we can provide an update to the committee in terms of what that actually looks like.
And there was a verbal update by the head of virtual school at the corporate parenting panel.
Would it help the committee if we had that added on? Yes, please, Dan.
Chairman, if I could just add, actually, a bald figure of 31% underachieving doesn't really tell us very much. We don't know whether they are just underneath the boundary or whether they're a long way underneath. And we certainly can't see how much progress they have made. And that, I think, for this committee is really important. I know how hard you all work, and I know this is better than it was some years ago. So I'm delighted with the progress. I would just like to understand more. Thank you.
Makes a valid point there. I think if we could have that looked at a little bit more, because that would be where our concern would be. And going forward, if we were to see that again and understand a little bit about why it is, we may be able to help any work around that. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, and notwithstanding the fact that you have lots to do, if we could have that, that would be much appreciated. Are there any more comments? Councillor Hagger.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more. I was just reading this to pick this up. On page 48, we've got down here that there's a very large percentage in the last 6 months, 94 children were received into care, and a result of safeguarding concerns. Could you just explain a little bit around that, and if we were expecting that increase? And if we were, are we expecting any further increases like that? I presume it's a big increase because you've got the largest percentage. Thank you.
In relation to our LAC population, Hillingdon's LAC population over a long, if you were to take the last 10 years, actually it hasn't really changed that much. And whilst the UASC population is growing, the indigenous population in terms of our LAC remains more static. Actually, it's not really that much change at all. So you would see a change in the last 18 months, and I think that would be an increasing trajectory because of the UASC, and there is no transfer. The national transfer scheme is not working, so therefore those children that would have been transferred to under the national transfer scheme to different places in the country, that's not happening anymore. So there hasn't been any transfer of UASC in the last 18 months, which means that they remain on our, they remain our children that we're the corporate parents for, and they remain obviously, so therefore the numbers for UASC keep going up, and that will show a steady increase. And it's not going to change, I don't think, in the foreseeable future.
Sorry, and just to add, I suppose it may be sort of slightly misleading as well, because obviously during the same period there'll be ones dropping out. So the overall net position actually isn't that much changed, really, in terms of the overall number in. So that's actually just the number that were received into care, but there's quite a turnover sort of, day in, day out across the years. So the overall number of children looked after isn't tremendously different. It's slightly higher, but not tremendously different.
Flynn?
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask, on the fixed-term exclusions point on page 41, what happens if one of these children has a fixed-term exclusion? How long is that likely to be, and what's the process for reintegrating them back into education if they've been excluded?
Thank you for the question. In terms of, I suppose, to answer the question, it's probably helpful to understand just how we've organised the virtual school team. And as Zafar said, every looked after child has an allocated, dedicated virtual school officer. And in each school, there's what's known as a designated teacher whose responsibility it is to be the first point of contact for all education matters, welfare matters in that school to do with any children looked after in the school. So the relationship between the virtual school officer and the school through the designated teacher is really important. So the first thing we always try and do is to say, well, actually, can there be some alternative arrangements put in place that actually try to diffuse situations so that actually there doesn't need to be a disruption to the child's education. So that's the first port of call, is always mediation, alternative options, so that we can actually avoid any fixed term exclusions. If there is absolutely an unavoidable situation for a fixed term exclusion, generally speaking, they're very short. But what we try and do is to discuss with the school, well, what may have triggered this particular incident. Is the support package that's in place as evidenced through the personal education plan delivering what's needed, what's changing? And that's what we want to get to the root cause of, because if we can understand that, then we can obviously diffuse and prevent any situations that may arise that may lead to the need for fixed term exclusion.
Thank you. Are we... Councillor Cooper? We're not. You go. Please.
Last one, Chairman, I promise, and this should be straightforward. On page 50, there is a huge list of enrichment activities that our officers undertake with children. It's a remarkable list, and I'm terribly impressed. But I do not know how many different children, rather than the total number of places taken up, are actually participating. So we could have 50 children who are doing absolutely everything, or we could have rather more children dipping in and taking a sort of a more of a pick and mix attitude. Any idea?
Okay. Every activity will be somewhat, carefully considered, and in terms of the children are going to be attending, depending on the age and a level of maturity and activity. So it's actually quite tailored, and in terms of the audience and what the purpose. For example, when we had the most recent event was the summer barbecue that Councillor Jane Palmer also attended. We had over 50 young people that actually attended. That was mostly 16 plus, because obviously it's a barbecues outside, health and safety and so on. So depending on the activity, then they are very carefully selected. So if there is then, the activity that they went to see Mousetrap, again, selection of young people that actually might be interested in theatre, for example. So there would be communication with the children's social worker saying, for this age group, would you recommend anyone? So there are a lot of communication and liaison between the participation team and the children's social work teams into the selection.
Thank you. Yes, I do understand that, but what I would like to know is how many of our young children are actually engaging in these activities and how many are not engaging. And I don't expect you to have those figures here and now, but if the committee could have them, I think it would be helpful.
Just to be clear about, in terms of each activity and the number of children, whether it's the same children or not, is that what you're asking?
No, I want to know how many different children are engaging in these activities.
So I think the key is the word different, because this committee likes the nub of what the figures mean and represent, so we can look at unmet need, possible services that we could and couldn't offer. So if we can have some understanding of what that actually looks like, because I think, although Councillor Cooper's point is, I think, and she will correct me, this could be the same people just dipping in and out of all these activities. So I know that means more work for officers, but the committee would be grateful if that could be done. Councillor Edgington.
Just on that point, Chair, I think there's quite a difficulty because obviously during the whole of the year there will be more than the 200 or 300 children who are in care at any one time. There are probably, 500 in total. But so trying to identify whether any of those which have been involved. And the second point is that quite a lot of the children won't actually be in Hillingdon. They'll be outside in other areas where, for various reasons, they've been moved away. But it will be useful to know roughly, in terms of those who are based in Hillingdon and are between, let's say, 5 and care leavers age.
I will try to undertake some analysis and deep sampling of all those children attended all those activities and provide some form of overview.
Did you want to
Chairman,
just add one last comment?
One last comment. I would be really surprised if there weren't registers of attendance at these events. Really surprised. And I would have thought they would be very useful.
Okay, so I think I'm going to draw this agenda item to a close now. I think we've had a full and frank discussion about it and created more work for officers, as is our delight on this committee. So thank you very much for attending tonight's effort. I know you have another appointment, so please feel free to go. And excellent report. Thank you very much. We'll now take agenda item 5. Thank you for allowing us to jiggle around with that, Ian, and you're always welcome on this committee, and we have your report in front of us. Do you want to highlight anything, or would you like us to go straight into questions? Highlight, maybe?
I'm happy to do either.
Just an overview. We've read it. It's very, very comprehensive, but if there's anything you feel you'd like to be proud of or otherwise, please, this is your floor.
Yeah. I think the on page 9 and a few pages afterwards, I provide the summary just to give you a flavour of the volume of complaints that the council is dealing with across the whole organisation. So you can see from that really in terms of the volumes of complaints, total stage 1 complaints have increased slightly from 837 in 2017-18 to 860. Stage 2s, 73 in total, 56 for 2018-19. And in terms of the Ombudsman investigation, a slight increase from 75 to 85 in terms of overall across the organisation. So it's kind of like, I can't say that volumes of complaints are going up or down. They're pretty much static across the organisation. But I think the thing that we're most proud of, I suppose, is a significant increase in volume of compliments that have been received. So in the last financial year, 2017-18, 54 in total across the whole organisation. And for last financial year, it was 234 in total. From the figures that I'm looking at in the first 6 months of this financial year, the trend is even higher than what we're projecting to receive. So the likelihood is that the compliments will even go up even more. Just to give you a flavour of members' inquiries in terms of across the piece, 2017-18, 8,500 in total members' inquiries. This is on page 12. But for 2018-19, 11,675 members' inquiries in total. That's an increase of 37% in 1 year. The big areas, the one huge area is waste. 5,813 members' inquiries in 1 year. It dwarfs everything else. Planning gets 1,891, housing 1,240, green spaces just over 1,000. This committee obviously focuses on social care. The volume of social care is very, very small in terms of members' inquiries. Adult social care, the total for last year was 117, and for children's services, 69. So the volume is very much in resident services, but actually, on the whole, resident services members' inquiries are generally far easier to deal with because a waste complaint, pretty much you can deal with fairly quickly because it's about collecting something and doing it. Whereas an adult social care or children's members' inquiry could take significantly longer to deal with. So they are the more tricky ones. I think that's the overview, but I'm very happy to go into the detail if that's what you want me to do. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to point out to you, is on page 12, I provided you with some comparison of how we compare with other neighbouring local authorities. We only do this for adult social care and children's services, and you can see from the figures on page 12 for both children's services and adult services, actually as a council we compare really well in comparison to volumes that we've got. So, that's sort of the comparative figure that I can provide you with. Very happy to deal with any questions or keep going.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner has a question.
I'll get in before Councillor Eglinton does. Page 36. There's duplicates on here.
Yes.
Oh, it's okay then, I'm not going mad. So, can you explain why?
Yeah,
I think there's 4, isn't there?
No, there's 2 that's been duplicated.
2 and 2.
And actually what I need to do is add a correction to that, so I will make a change to that. What's happened is that when it was being copied over, just 2 just got copied incorrectly, so that's clearly right.
Okay.
Oh,
Anyone else? Yeah. Councillor Edgington after Councillor Gardner.
So I'll start again. Apologies. Yes, on page 10, there's reference under paragraph 2, last bullet point, to local government ombudsman report. And that was a case which I think was dealt with in part 2 of a cabinet meeting, so it's probably not had a great deal of views. But looking at the report itself from the Ombudsman, there were a couple of things which perhaps are relevant, particularly to this committee. One was that the strategy for adults and children with autism, whether that's been addressed, there is one for which the council has. There was reference made apparently on the Ombudsman's report to the website saying it was going to be in force by January 2019, but I couldn't see it. And then secondly, the council's restricted persons register, that is names of individuals who for some reason or other are very difficult, and the council has decided that it will arrange for any communication with these individuals to be dealt with separately, possibly by you, Ian, I'm not sure. But looking again, there was meant to be a code, details of the policy available on the website, and again I couldn't find that on the website, so I don't know whether that is there and what the code is. Leading on to that, it also talks about the council saying that members will be able to access that information, the list of names of people who are difficult, let's say. And I'm not aware of that, and I'm not sure that any councillor has, any member, elected member, has been advised of how to access or where that list is.
So there's a couple of questions there, I suppose. Members are shaking their heads, so I would think none of us have that to hand. I certainly don't, and over this side everyone's shaking their heads. So there's a lot to answer there, Ian. I don't care which way you go with it, but an answer would be appreciated. Thank you.
In terms of the autism policy, that's actually being developed at the moment, and it's more to do with the what the Ombudsman wanted in terms of that policy was to have like a named person, so they can actually go to that person and say, look, actually this is all about. So that's actually being developed at the moment, and I understand that it's Kevin Byrne that's in the lead in terms of doing that, so that's being looked at the moment. In terms of the website with the policies, they're actually on the website if you go onto the complaints page. The restricted persons, I'll come on to that in a minute, but the policy that you actually need to look at is the unreasonable and unreasonable behaviour policy, and it's actually on the complaints webpage, so you can access that at any time you want to. What's happening with the what's happening with the council's webpage as a whole is they're all being revamped. So it may just be that it's when you try to access it, it's not quite there, but it's actually on the website. I have checked that. In terms of the restricted persons register, I'm not sure about the point that you make, whether it was open to elected members. I'll have to check that point out. But what it is, it's on the council's internal website, so it's Horizon, and in there you have to put in restricted persons register, and then you have access to that system through that. So I'm not sure whether that bit is actually opened up to elected members, but I can check that for you.
Okay, so there appears to be some uncertainty as to whether we should see that or not. So I would, there's some councillors that have been around a lot longer than I have, and so if they are not aware of it, so what I would be saying is, can we have some guidance onto that as to whether we are supposed to see it, and if we are supposed to see it, how do we see it? Because it strikes me as the sort of thing that should be given at members' training. Because I'm not sure what we're talking about, whether we're talking about safety or whatever, but it should be, if we're to have it, can somebody tell us how we are to have it?
Yeah, access to it is via Horizon. My personal view is that it probably is useful for you to have it, because in that website, in the Restricted Persons Register, it will contain information about restrictions that we've placed on those people's accessing our resources, our information, our advice, contacts with us. There are some that we view as potentially a safety issue, but the majority will be those people who have who continue to just keep emailing or corresponding with us when there's actually nothing to say. But actually, those very people might well be people that are engaging with yourselves, so it's perhaps useful for you to know.
I think what you're highlighting there is possible mental health situation as well, which for our own safety, I have to be honest, not all of us visit in twos. So I have to own that, and I know what the guidelines are, and whilst I take as much as I can to look after my own safety, there are times when that information would be vital to us. Where that would be the decision as to whether I entered the house or not. So I think we do need some guidance on that, how we can get it, because I also sometimes struggle to use Horizon.
I will speak to Lloyd White, because I think it will be useful for you to actually have access to it, because there is a reason why those people are on that register.
Lovely. Councillor Cooper.
Is it organised into wards so that one would look at one's own ward rather than looking at everything across the borough?
In terms of members' inquiries or complaints, or?
In terms of looking at the list of people on the restricted register. I really don't want to have to trawl through the whole of the borough's list of restricted people. If they're in my ward, I need to know.
And with respect, I would imagine it's a need-to-know only basis, so I don't actually want to know what perhaps Councillor Gardner or Councillor Cooper struggle with. I'm only interested in my own sake. Well, no disrespect, I've got enough work to do without looking at everybody else's wards. I think I'm only interested in where my elected remit is, because we're talking about people's business that I have no right to look at. I'm only interested in my residents, so I would expect that to be in some sort of, if it's for our use, for our own safety, which is where I'm coming from, I just want to look up H and see the problems I may or may not encounter, not necessarily Botwell or Uxbridge North. Councillor Gardner.
It's also worth remembering that every ward has got three, well, with the exception of yourself, has got three councillors in it, which means somebody could approach one councillor and not get any joy out of them and then go on to somebody else. I mean, I think, first of all, we should all have access to it. It should be ward specific, but I think it's imperative that we know, to be perfectly honest with you, because, well, something awful could happen to one of us.
I think you should have access to it. I don't know what why you don't, but I will find out and come back to you. But in terms of the way the Restricted Persons Register is currently set up, it's because officers just simply look under the name. So all we will do is just put down whatever the surname of the person is. It will come up. But I understand that it can be done by ward, so I will look into that for you and come back to you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Ian, thank you very much for the report. Very full. A lot of detail in there. It must take you a long period of time to pull this together. I appreciate it. It helps a great deal. Could you help my understanding? The complaints that go to the Ombudsman, have they first gone through stage 1 and 2?
Not all of them will. For this committee, you've got 3 different complaint processes in play. With the adult social care complaints procedure, there is only one complaint stage. So someone complains, we respond, and the next step is to the Ombudsman. With the children's process, there are 3 stages. So you've got stage 1, where it's usually at a service manager level. Then stage 2, at the children's services, will be an independent investigation by 2 independent people. Stage 3 is a review panel. The statutory process for the children's procedures is it has to go through all 3 before it goes to the Ombudsman. And so the 4th step is the Ombudsman in terms of that. One thing I would say about the children, sometimes it does go from stage 1 directly to the Ombudsman, where someone just believes that we're not going to sort it out, and an independent person's not going to sort it out, they just want to go straight to the Ombudsman. If that's the case, then we can agree to allow them to go there. In terms of I suppose the rest of the complaints, they fall under something called the corporate complaints procedure. Now, that process is a bit more flexible. What happens there is that if we respond at stage 1 and we believe that there is nothing more that we can say at stage 2 or 3, it usually relates to a policy decision. So, for example, if someone's challenging the social housing allocation policy, if we're saying this is the policy, nothing's going to change, in that instance we can actually allow them directly from stage 1 to go to the Ombudsman and bypass stages 2 and 3. But equally, you can go from stage 2 directly to the Ombudsman, or you can escalate all the way through 1, 2 and 3. So the corporate complaints procedure, which applies to almost everything else, is more flexible, and it allows escalation at different levels.
Thank you. Very full answer. If I can just follow that up. So on the investigations by the Ombudsman under, I think it's under the housing, or it's on page 21, the first 2 on the bottom there that are upheld, that would suggest there has been an error in judgment by officers somewhere along the line that's possibly been looked at and examined by 2 other managers. What learning is taken? How does the learning from the Ombudsman's decision feed back into managerial decisions such that we can have confidence that these sorts of judgments are being accurately made going forwards?
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's a complaint that we've dealt with or a complaint that the Ombudsman have dealt with. Where a complaint is upheld and there are failings, where we've failed in whatever respect, each one of those has it goes back to the heads of service, it goes back to the team managers and say, look, where it's the Ombudsman, this is the finding, this is what they found, what are you going to do to sort it out? And as a result of that, there will be some form of action plan to address the various issues. And on those 2 particular ones, for example, they did have actions as to what we needed to do so it doesn't happen again. Because there's no point if we keep repeating the same stuff over and over again. When it's done at stage 1 and 2, within the council's complaints procedure, we have something called a learning memo. So every officer who investigates it completes a learning memo in which they put down what the fault is, what they've learned from it, what they're going to do as a result differently. What then happens is Tony, Dan and the various senior managers, at some point I turn up and present the complaint report saying these are the findings, these are the things that's highlighted, these are the things you need to start doing. So it's that type of learning element that takes place. So we do analyse, we do start to think about what exactly we've got wrong. The difficulty that I always have is that when you think about the volume of people we provide a service to, and you look at the volume of complaints that we have, and then if I try and extrapolate that and say to Tony, for your adult social care, you deal with X thousands of people, but here's one person whose finding is of fault and there's something gone wrong. Whilst I can't say you've got a systemic problem, I can actually say for one instance, there is an issue that we need to address. So it's that sort of type of work that goes on. But I think we do try really hard to learn from that, because it's no point in just keep making the same old mistake, because that's not great.
And the fact that there's more compliments would help me understand that we're probably doing an awful lot right. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ian, for a very comprehensive report, as others have said. I've just got one query on page 12. It gives in the table under the adult social care the complaints comparing us to some of our neighbouring authorities. And I appreciate it's a small sample, so I just wanted to basically check whether this is a statistical oddity or whether there's more to it. But the percentage conversion rate from stage 1 complaints to ombudsman investigations under adult social care in our case is nearly 25%, whereas the other local authorities they're all under 10%. So I just wanted to check, is this just a statistical oddity, or is there something more to this that we should be aware of?
It's something that will iron itself out, but there are two factors to consider really. Last year was a year where we had a lot of historical complaints that went through the system, and it took the Ombudsman considerable time to go through that. I mean, it's taking, for example, the local government Ombudsman at the moment, somewhere in the region of 7 to 8 months to conclude a complaint. So what happens is there's sometimes a crossover. So you may have it in one financial year, but it appears in the next financial year. So it looks a bit odd in terms of the volume that you've actually got there. So it's just sort of, it's kind of like a, not a backlog, but it's one where the response turns up a bit, the decision turns up later in the following year. So it makes it look worse than it is. But the other thing in terms of the Hillingdon and the 9 is that the complaints that go to the Ombudsman are often the ones that we can't resolve. And it goes up there only because the complainants just feel that we haven't sorted it, we're not going to sort it, and that the only opportunity for them to do is to go to the Ombudsman. I think the thing I would look at, rather than the 9, is how many of those were actually upheld by the Ombudsman. And I think you'll find that it comes straight back down to how few that were actually upheld. Because there are some complainants that we have who believe that whatever we do, there's kind of like they don't trust that an internal service can provide them with a level of satisfaction, and it's those that find hard to get through.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? And obviously it's a resident's choice, isn't it? How they and we must always uphold that. It's a resident's choice as to how they have their complaints dealt with at a fashion, and if somebody wants to go straight to the Ombudsman, we must understand why. Very, very comprehensive report, Ian. Thank you very, very much. It's pleasing to see that we seem to have that as well as we possibly can. I think that the facts and figures speak for themselves, and I think it's still a shining example of how a council deals with the complaints procedure. So thank you very much for presenting that report, and as always it's a pleasure to see you here. Please feel free to go. I'm sure you have somewhere else that you would rather be. Moving on, we will now take our committee review, agenda item 7, our universal credit. We have the report in front of us, so we need to consider it for the review and subject to the agreed amendments, endorse the report for submission to the Cabinet. So let's have a little chat on it. But I will say that having read the report, I was pleasantly surprised how much work we put into it as a committee. I think each and every one of us has taken part in what is quite a difficult review at times and quite distressing. And when I've read it several times, but I think we can be pleased with the way it's turned out, and I have to say, Anisha, you've written an excellent report there. You've pulled that together really, really well, and you need to minute that for yourself, please. Are there any comments? Does anybody want to say anything about it, please? Stunned silence. Councillor Edwards.
I would also just like to say what a good job Anisha's done. It's a very full report, very long, a lot of information you've had to pull together here, and very much appreciate it, so thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I would have been a lot stronger on some of the things, as I'm sure you guessed. Will this be available for all the members to see?
I see no reason why not. It should be available for everybody to see. I can't see why it won't be. It's a public document, so it will be available.
I think that each group office should have several copies of these given to the group offices so that people can see them, because we are going to get problems with universal credit. People are going to ask us what we've done, what's happened, and it's quite a good crib sheet.
I have no problem with this committee showcasing its work in a public domain and in our group office to encourage those councillors that don't actually, perhaps are not fully aware of what each policy overview committee does. So yes, I haven't got a problem with that. Councillor Cooper.
Chairman, thank you. This report underplays, I think, some of the frustrations that some of us have felt while it's been put together, while we've been looking at all the evidence. It's been extremely difficult. We are not altogether content with what we have found out. So I'm very, very pleased that we are going to come back to it sooner rather than later, because I'm sure there are more things that we can learn that will help our residents.
And I think perhaps when I present that to Cabinet, that may be my opportunity, if I'm allowed to and if I can get away with it, voice our, what's the word you used, frustrations, because, you know, we've said that this has been difficult because it's a government-based thing, but what we've looked at is our residents, and our frustration will be removed. Some of our residents will be feeling considerably frustrated. So I think it's important that we do feed that back in some way, and I'm quite happy to put that verbally across. Are we happy with the draft report as it is, or do we think that, I mean, I take the point that's being made that perhaps, I mean, I'm not criticising the way the report's been written is absolutely fantastic. I think we probably have underplayed our frustration, but I'm not really sure how we can inflame that in any way. Councillor Gardner?
There's a recommendation that said Cabinet requests that the committee and relevant Cabinet members receive further report from the Council for 6 to 12 months. And we have it 6 months, so that we can look at it again. In case there are any updates.
What's the view?
No objection. Well, you need to change the wording. This being 1 year on after its rollout began, probably. Yeah.
Okay, so never mind the apostrophe. The committee would prefer or would recommend that we have 6 months only. We don't give it 12 months. We have it back within 6 months. Is that okay, Nish? Have you got that? Okay. Are there any other recommendations? Are we happy to accept it?
Very happy to accept it, and I actually think that it's not a bad thing that the frustrations that we had as a panel aren't clearly visible on the report, because the report isn't about us. It is about the process, and that very clearly is stated here. And I think that actually us putting that sort of spin on it, whilst understandable, might detract from the strength of the report. So I think it's a good one as it is.
I accept what you're saying. All I was meaning by that was if we were frustrated, goodness only knows. And I'm anxious that our frustrations are not about ourselves, but it's about the system that our residents are having to live with. And I think that does come across, and I can put that across verbally when I deliver the report, I hope. But yes, it's not about us whinging about it, because fortunately for myself, I don't have to have anything to do with universal credit in my life. So thank you very much. Thank you to all the officers and everything that have taken part, and all the witnesses, and we will ensure that everybody that took part, who was a witness, who took part in that or has an interest, has a copy of that. And of course it will be on the website, that anybody's watching tonight wants to read it. It'll be on there when it's completed. Lovely. So thank you very much. Shall we move on to the next agenda item, which I will just have to flick over, which is committee review agenda item 8. So this is where we are going to consider potential review topics for our next review. We have something on the table in front of us. What I suggest we do is have a little tiny discussion. Anybody wants to suggest something, and then I think what we should do is ask the officers to prepare some small, maybe not a scoping report, but some guidance as to the validity of those that come before us tonight. So somebody wants to start. Councillor Gardner, you've indicated.
Well, there was talk earlier on that there's an autism policy under progress. A minute. Is there any chance that we can have a scoping report about how people with autism, and I'm bearing in mind how big of the spectrum is. So we're talking some people, I know from personal experience, there are adults with Asperger's that may present rather difficultly with the different departments. And I just wonder if we can have some sort of report, say how people will react to different people, and talking predominantly adults with autism. Does that make sense? Yes. I just worry that they may be overlooked, or people go, well, pay no attention to them because they're, yeah.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. I have, in my casework recently and in ward panels with the police, come across more concerns and significant concerns about the impact of drug dealing on the lives of our vulnerable residents. I am very concerned about it. I'm concerned about the increase in county lines in Hillingdon. I'm concerned about how young people are groomed. I believe they call it cuckooing. And I would hope that there is something that we could do. We could find out how we could support young people better, and vulnerable adults, because they are equally badly affected, how to help them so that they are not drawn into either taking drugs or dealing drugs.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. I would put into the mix a review around our council housing as a landlord, and particularly around energy efficiency. I believe we have quite dated housing stock. We are committed as a borough on environmental standards and to reduce our carbon footprint. I would like to understand what exactly our housing standards are. I know from my time in Useley that a number of the complaints are to do with solid wall, poor ventilation, damp, poor heating, poor insulation, and I think it is appropriate for us to be looking at it to see where we are, where we want to be, and what sort of programme and investment it would require to get us to the standards we need to be.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, just a couple of ideas to throw into the pot. Firstly, dementia care, which I think is increasingly a big issue for many residents, obviously not just for older residents but also those with early onset dementia. Big issue for a lot of people in this borough. And also I recall seeing some fairly recent reports where we had some of the highest levels of childhood obesity of anywhere in Greater London, and I wonder, given our sort of public health remit, whether childhood obesity is something we could look at and how we can encourage children to have more active lifestyles. And I notice that's something within this committee's remit. So, 2 ideas there.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Edgington to speak, I made a mistake. I said that this piece of paper I had in front of me was on every table. It isn't. So I know something that you all don't, and at the moment that's just the way I like it. No. I've already done some discussion about youth services and a possible review which is why I'm thinking about what you said about obesity, and Dan has given me a few pieces of information on here, looking at what our youth service does and really what we need it to do in the future, because we may possibly be not reaching people. What we did years ago in youth development is not perhaps what's needed now. Dan, do you want to say something about that now? Yeah, just to let everybody else know the information I have on the table.
So, thank you, Chairman. I mean, in terms of our youth services, I mean, we as a borough do a lot for our youth services, and I don't just mean purely in terms of the youth services. I mean, actually, the investment we make in things like park gyms, the grants we give to the Scouts, the new buildings we build for the voluntary sector groups. Actually, if you take it in, and of course our leisure centres as well, and everything else we do, if you take it in its round, that's quite a big offer. But I suppose it's, as Councillor Palmer has said, that it's actually about, well, actually, is that keeping pace with the changing needs, expectations, and actually those risks that some of our young people are exposed to? So I think it's really a question to say, well, actually, what more can we do? How can we evolve the service to be something that young people want, and so therefore it doesn't become a dinosaur, perhaps, in terms of what young people need and want.
Looking at what young people have to put up with now, knife crime, and that's not something that I had in my life, and it's quite a scary time at the moment, as we know from what happened in our borough last night. Just trying to go out and have a good time. So that is something I think we could consider along with the other topics, and that would take into account what you're saying there about obesity. So, Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. I had a little list here, and one of them, not the top, but one of them said home energy action to improve housing stock. So I certainly agree with what Councillor Edwards had to say earlier. The one thing which I don't know whether we could consider is, because we've got multi-year reviews, haven't we, whether it would be sensible to try and establish more than one at this stage, rather than just concentrating on one, so that once we get one rolling, we can immediately start on the next. Because otherwise, as with universal credit, we've been on this to the exclusion of any other review for quite some time.
Yes, I don't want to interrupt you, but what I've been thinking of, because we did quite a long review now, I would be hoping that we could think about mini reviews, so that we wouldn't have to be submerged in one deep review. I think we've done that. I think now the next thing would be to have a couple, or at least if we've got a waiting list, we're in a better position. So that's why I'm asking for lots of suggestions, and then we'll have a democratic view and something that we still do in this council democracy. We will decide amongst ourselves which ones we're going to choose. But I'm predisposed to mini reviews.
Yeah.
Have you got more to say?
Just a tiny bit, yes. And I'm not going to be prorogued, am I?
I wouldn't dream of it, Councillor. It's not how I carry on. I'm strictly by the rules.
Thank you, Chair. There were a couple of things. One was homelessness and housing needs, and particularly on housing in multiple occupation, HMOs, which I don't think the council, and I know it's very difficult, but I'm not sure the council has been able really to identify all of the HMOs under the new rules, and I'm sure that the registration list doesn't include them all. Another was disabled care and support, looking at best practice, but I think that may link in elsewhere. Young people, social care support for the families, but that links in with the idea of youth services. And then finally on public health, addressing or seeking to reduce the variation in life expectation, which is dramatic throughout the borough. Again, that may be related to obesity as well. Okay.
Thank you. And also we have had a couple of suggestions from Sandra Taylor as well, because I've sort of gone to officers and asked for some guidance really just to get us going, and what's come up from her are a couple of topics for consideration. Supported living for adults, what is it, how does it work, and what's the difference between housing and the care element in supported living, and semi-independent living for young people, non-regulated care, how it works, the benefits to young people, quality monitoring, and the benefits to the young person in the council. So I think we'll put those as well, because Sandra's taken the trouble to put that in an email to me. Councillor Hagger.
Thank you, Jess. I just thought a mini review would be really good on encouraging home ownership. So I'd sort of like to know a little bit more about that, what we do within the borough with our residents and our children, but also outside. What are we offering? Are we offering any discounts? And what's happening really under home ownership? So it's sort of trying to get the rented sector down, get people back into owning their own homes.
Okay, so we've got quite a lot of suggestions there, haven't we? I'm not quite sure how democracy we're going to work all that out, but I think we'll put those together and then we'll have some further discussion on it. Is it by the next meeting we have to have them agreed? When do we have to have them agreed?
We can agree them at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay, so we can agree them at the next meeting. So I think what I'll ask Nisha to do is to pull those together and send them out to us so that we can see what we've all said, and then we'll have, I don't know, maybe choose what? Fight? No, Councillor Gardner, there'll be no fighting in this council. Draw lots. So that's a little bit better. But I think we're well able. We're a hard-working committee, and we have the capacity to all agree on a few topics that we can do. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to the officers. Thank you, Dan, for pulling that together. I'll make sure that everybody sees this that you've done, and I won't keep it to myself. Okay, so we can go on to agenda, unless anyone wants to say anything, I can go on to agenda item 9, which is the forward plan, which is for noting. Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. I note that the first item is the Hillingdon Homelessness Prevention and Rough Sleeping Review and Strategy, which is listed for Cabinet tomorrow. I didn't see it on the Cabinet agenda. And bearing in mind that it's meant to be tied up, I think, for the December after consultation, and if you run to page 66, it talks about the strategy being approved following consultation. I wonder what the situation was.
Dan, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that the draft strategy will be presented as a Cabinet member report, and that we're on track to, following a period of consultation, we're on track to report that back for approval to the December Cabinet.
Councillor Edgington.
Would it be possible for this committee to have a look at it? Be consulted, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dan. So we'll have a look at that if we may. Councillor Edgington makes a fair point. Anything else on the forward plan? Then on to the work programme, which is equally for noting. If anybody has any comments, please raise your hand. otherwise, that brings us to the end of the meeting at 8:15. Thank you very much for your attendance and your participation. See you